Hello, my friend. Before we start this amazing episode, I want to invite you to the personal Patreon page of this podcast. If you love what's being done here and want to keep the podcast and the meditations free to the public, then you can come on over to our brand new community on Patreon and donate $11.11 a month, and all proceeds will go towards keeping this free, keeping this going. Plus, we'll be building a community together, and I'll give you bonus material. You can explore this option in the description of this podcast, or just go to patreon.com/Dr. Reese. Let's begin.
Welcome to Inner Peace with Dr. Reese, a program that can help you become liberated in the modern world. Now, here's your host, Dr. Kevin W. Reese.
So, what is centering prayer, and how can it transform your life? Welcome to episode number 114. Today, I have the pleasure of sitting down with Mike Smoolca. He's a contemplative group and workshop facilitator and a dedicated teacher and student of contemplative practice and spirituality in the Christian tradition. So before we dive into this conversation, sit down, relax, and take in this beautiful and valuable recording. Mike, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Kevin. Nice to be here.
So how would you describe centering prayer?
It's an intimate prayer method, right? It's really opening up to God's presence and God's action within in the time of the prayer, opening up to the possibility of transforming yourself through the prayer and in life.
It's called prayer, but a lot of people would say it's meditation.
Sure, you can call it by any name you'd like.
Right.
I guess it's the understanding of prayer brings a different spirit, brings a different attitude, I think, to the folks that participate in it. Because it truly is, at the end of the day, a relationship or deepening in your relationship with God.
Right. So I've been doing centering prayer for maybe 2 months.
Okay.
And so what I do, maybe I'll just describe what I do.
Sure.
And that'll help the listeners understand. Is I sit down, talk to God. Doesn't need to last long, 30 seconds, maybe a minute, depending on what's going on. Invite the spirit in, invite his presence. And then I usually say, be still and know that I am God, because I think that's one of the most important lines in the Bible. If not the, I close my eyes and I go into a meditation. And anytime my mind wanders, I use what you would call a sacred word or term to come back to center. And I do that for about 20 minutes. Is that about accurate?
I like how you describe it. I would maybe describe it a little differently.
Okay.
You're really the objective of the prayer, if that's the right word. And as I progress on my own journey, words become harder and harder to use correctly. There is really no objective to the prayer other than to really open yourself up to God's presence in action. And I think both of those terms, both of those concepts, those ideas are really important because we often think of God's presence, but God's action is just as important as God's presence. So it's a prayer of letting go, of surrendering any expectation, surrendering anything that we may bring other than ourselves into the prayer. And so we enter the prayer with this idea that we're there just to deepen our relationship in intimacy with God. And so thoughts, there's a great, when I teach the prayer, there's a great thing that I continue to use over and over again, kind of a reminder that thoughts are important. So thoughts are an important, integral, and normal part of the prayer. So when you say your mind was wandering, what did you mean by that? Because I'd like to use you as a way to kind of educate folks,
Sure.
or clarify some stuff. So when you say when your mind wanders, you return to the symbol, the sacred symbol.
Yeah. So sometimes my mind will go to, it could go to something that needs to be done that day, or it could go to, my inner child acting up, the critic.
Yeah.
Or it could be a judgment.
Yeah.
And it just drifts from center.
Okay. So in centering prayer, we'll allow our thoughts to come and our thoughts to go. So we don't really focus on that. So when you say wandering, it's kind of embedded in the prayer that your thoughts will come and thoughts will go, right? It's kind of part of the prayer.
Right.
It's when we get caught in our thoughts. So if you got captured in your wanderings, if you got taken away on the trip, right?
Yeah.
Or
which can happens to a lot of people.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, but that's normal part of the prayer. There's a famous story that's told in Keating circles. Keating used to go out and teach centering prayer. And there was a story about him teaching to a group of nuns. And, they went into prayer, and 20 minutes later, one of the nuns came up to him and says, Father, I'm just no good at this prayer, right? I just can't do it. I must have had 10,000 thoughts in the 20 minutes. And he comes back and he says, without, skipping a beat, he said, isn't that wonderful? 10,000 opportunities to return to God.
Mm.
And that's really the meat of the prayer. It's not that we're trying to eliminate thoughts. It's not that we're trying to battle thoughts. We just let go of thoughts.
Well, this comes back to be still and know that I am God.
Exactly.
That line is just so profound. When you're still, and pretty much talking about the mind here, God can enter.
Yeah. And part of that stillness is also not being concerned that we'll be distracted, or not being concerned that our mind will wander or get caught up in those thoughts. There's a gentleness in the prayer because all we do is let go, right? When we notice that, all we do is let go. So that gentleness.
So even if you use your sacred word or sacred symbol 100 times, it's cool.
Well, and again, it's that attitude of, isn't that wonderful? 10,000 times or 100 times, returning back to God, right? Returning back to our intention, which is to consent to God's presence and action. So thoughts then become a friend. We're not battling with our thoughts. We're actually using them for the transformative process of letting go. And that transformation, that letting go, we bring into our lives.
Can the sacred word or symbol, can it change daily, or do you stick with the same one?
You stick with the same one, right? So that's another myth to dispel. Not a myth, but that sometimes, and I've been told this by folks, they say, my sacred word's not working. There's no such thing as the word not, working or not working. It's just a reminder about your consent. So, or a reminder of your intent to consent. So the sacred word, the prayer is very simple, because what we do is we bring our intention into this time, to consent to God's presence in action. Our sacred word reminds us of that intention. So it's not there to perform any magic. It's not there to do anything other than to interrupt our thoughts so that we can let them go. So a sacred word, and there's lots of different sacred words, right? So we teach, typically when we teach the prayer, we teach it as a word, a short word. But it could also be bringing your attention back to your breath. It could be a sacred glance, right? So if you're more visually oriented, it could be a diffuse image, right?
So it doesn't have to be a word.
It doesn't have to be a word.
You could visualize, say, a mountain.
Yeah, and what you don't want to do is focus on it, right? Then that's you want to be able to glance at it. So as if you were distracted and you looked in a distance, and that would remind you to come back to being centered on God's presence and action.
Is there a difference between having a word or a visual?
It's just what works for you.
Could you have both?
You typically have one. I mean, you stick with one. So you find one, and you'll find a word that will resonate with you, right? So typically when we teach it, we invite folks to be inspired by the Holy Spirit to kind of come up with a word. Let the word arise, if you will. You're not forcing it. It's not an intellectual exercise. You're opening to the Spirit for a word to just arise.
Can it be more than one word?
The guidance is to be a short word, one short word.
Yeah.
A syllable or two is recommended.
Yeah.
Because a word, in essence, is a thought, right? And the thought interrupts other thoughts, right? So it recenters you.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
It's been a good experience for me.
So I'm curious.
Yeah.
I'm curious. Did that, when I described it that way, did that help to clarify the term wandering, or did that change that experience for you of what it meant to wander?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, you give yourself freedom to wander, if you will.
Yeah.
And just bring yourself back. But
yeah,
the more you do it, the more your mind does not wander.
Yeah. The other myth that I'd like to talk about when I teach this is getting to a point of not having thoughts.
Yeah.
You really don't. I mean, when you die, I guess you don't have thoughts. But as long as you're living, just because you're human, you're going to have thoughts. What I like to say, though, is that you come to a point of stillness where the thoughts don't have that sticky quality anymore, right? Mm-hmm. Because you're not fighting your thoughts, or you're not fighting with the fact that
or you
should
gaps.
or shouldn't have thoughts.
Or you have gaps of
with that stillness, you have gaps. So the story that I share about that is, if you're out in nature, if you walk in the spring or the fall, especially, we're getting close to fall, you can come upon like a nice still pond. Like if you ever gone out into the woods and walked and come across a still pond, like glass, you can imagine it, right? Like glass. And then the geese land, right?
Yeah.
The pond doesn't try to fight the geese. It just lets them squawk and land and make all kinds of noise. But by not opposing them, the water just gets calm, gets still after they're done with their noisiness, right?
Yeah.
Same thing with a still mind. The more experience you have with the prayer, the stiller your mind becomes. So you can allow the thoughts to come in, but you're not opposing them, you're not fighting them, you're just letting them go. And eventually you get that point of stillness, that quietness, where the thoughts just, you can let them be without disruption.
Does the sacred word or visual,
mm-hmm.
can it carry over into regular life?
Yeah, sometimes.
So that if you're driving and your mind wanders, you can throw your sacred word out there and bring yourself back to center.
Yeah. Sometimes the sacred word becomes that anchor for you in life, right? You notice you notice, and a lot of it is the noticing, right? When you notice you're getting caught up in your thoughts, that's when the sacred word comes into play. But it's the noticing.
How about for sleeping? Could somebody kind of lay there in bed, and people are notorious for having trouble sleeping if their mind is racing?
Sure.
Could somebody use centering prayer for a few minutes to ease themselves into sleep?
That's possible. Some people actually, it has the opposite effect. Some people, when they do the prayer late at night, it makes them more awake.
Yeah.
So it's really, it really depends on your experience with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember hearing Father Thomas Keaton say that you might have more energy afterwards, and that's why he recommends the morning.
Well, the morning, and then the later in the afternoon sometime, or it doesn't have that impact on me. So if I do it too late, I'll fall asleep because it's very restful, right, for me. And there's it's very difficult battling sleep in the middle of the prayer, right? So I don't do it after a certain time, just because especially if I'm tired, I will fall asleep.
Sure.
So
what I find is that it's helped me watch my mind more. It's helped me be the witness. So your soul or your spirit can watch the movie screen. The practice is watching in a way, right? You're watching.
Well, but you're not paying attention, right? You may allow it, but you're not really paying attention.
Well,
right?
it's like sitting on your front porch and a flock of birds fly by. You see the birds, you only see them for 5 seconds or whatever, and they're gone.
Yeah, as long as you're not getting caught up in them, right?
Yeah, you don't get up and chase them.
Yeah, don't get up and chase them. Get your phone out and snap a picture, or whatever.
What kind of results have you seen from centering prayer from a lot of your students and associates?
The biggest result is the ability to let stuff go more, right? And the transformation of person, right? The classic fruits of the spirit begin to emerge in your life. You become more patient, become more loving. There's the journey, the contemplative journey, the contemplative Christian journey, as articulated by Keating, but also talked about by Merton, not in these terms, but if you look at how Thomas Merton's life evolved, he kind of lived this transformation. It's taught as the 4 S's: silence, solitude, solidarity, and service. So that's kind of the transformation that these contemplative practices, centering prayer and others, have had in my personal life, but I've also seen them in others, where you begin to crave silence. When I first started to practice, I turned off the radio because I just didn't want the noise anymore. Right. So you begin to relish that silence. With more time in silence, you begin to become comfortable with solitude, right? Where solitude isn't necessarily loneliness. Some people avoid solitude, being alone, because they get lonely. You begin to find a presence in solitude. You begin to enjoy those times more and more that you're by yourself, because it's not a lonely time.
Right.
Then the next S is solidarity. You begin to, through these experiences and just going deeper in who you really are, you begin to find this basic unity with others and with all of creation, right? This feeling that you're not this separate self anymore, right? That you're enmeshed in creation, right? And then service out of that becomes this genuine desire to express this love from this solitude that you have in genuinely serving others, right? A lot of people are taught service as a path to express their faith. Some do it as an obligation, right? But when I've just personally experienced this in my own life and in watching others, service then just becomes something you need to do as an expression of that love that you gain from that solidarity you feel with all of creation.
Right.
So it's in essence, it's basically the growing, the fruition of the true self.
The witness.
Yeah, the witness. Yeah, it's the true self that and it goes by many terms, but that true self, that deepest part of ourselves, right? That we find, right, in the silence, in the solitude, in the solidarity, in the service.
The kingdom is within.
Exactly, right? Or as Thomas Merton would say, the gate of heaven is everywhere.
Is it recommended that it's always 20 minutes, or can it be longer or shorter?
Oh, it could be longer for sure. Shorter, 20 minutes is a recommended time. And the reason for that is that it takes about that long to quiet the mind. 15 to 20 minutes just to get the mind still.
Yeah, I've had experiences where because you put the timer on the phone.
Yeah.
And the alarm goes off, and I'm just like, I don't want to stop. But 20 minutes is convenient.
Yeah.
For the day. It really is.
It is. And, my typical time is a half an hour, but if I'm really challenged, as long as I get in 20 minutes, that seems to sustain me. It's half an hour for, twice a day.
Could someone just do 5 minutes somewhere in the middle of the day if they were sitting in their car and in the parking lot?
I mean, some amount of time in silence, some amount of time in prayer is better than none. 20 minutes is the ideal, but if you're really if you have an extra 5 minutes, it's not bad to just be in silence, right?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but this method was made popular by Father Keaton in the modern era. But where did he get it from?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's part of the Christian heritage. Desert Fathers and Mothers kind of started this idea, 3rd century, I believe, when Christianity became accepted in Rome. Bunch of folks went off and said, well, we want to live in isolation. We want to live on the fringes of society, and they really became the first monks. And they began to practice these contemplative methods, just being in silence, taking a verse out of the Bible or a word out of the Bible, and kind of just spending time with it. Those practices evolved through the monastics of the ages, and the mystics of the ages. This centering prayer in particular was adopted from the Cloud of Unknowing. It was an English work that was written, I think, in the 13th century, 14th century, somewhere around there. And it described the method roughly, but it also described the transformation and the restructuring of consciousness. It was actually the first map of consciousness that was recorded in Christian history of the time. Other maps like Teresa of Avila, the many mansions, the 7 mansions came after that. But this was the first kind of map of consciousness that went around the understanding of prayer.
Yeah. Is this something that Eckhart would have done?
Meister Eckhart? Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so. I mean, he was a mystic. He didn't, to my awareness, he didn't document a method of prayer. But it really was just being with God, right? Just being with that source of the divine that's within each of us.
Yeah, I don't know how familiar you are with Buddhism, but it is very similar to Vipassana,
Mhm.
which is watching the mind in meditation.
Mhm.
Very similar.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's more of an active. I don't know much about it, so you'd have to tell me a little bit more about it.
And Buddhism also doesn't usually bring God into it.
Yeah.
Not that, some Buddhists might believe in God and might not, but
Mhm.
they just keep it out.
Well, you can always get in trouble with God too, right? I mean, meaning
Yeah.
that your thought of God isn't God, right? Your thoughts of who God
Right.
isn't who God is, right? And so if you bring a concept of God into your prayer, then or into your practice, then that could be a distraction. That could be very much an ego. I think the common point. Well, there's lots of common points here amongst these practices, but the letting go of the ego, the diminishment of the ego, is certainly core to all of these practices.
Hmm. What do you say to another Christian
Mhm.
that isn't down with this? There are many who they say, no, that's not in the Bible. That's a meditation. That's no way. I mean, what do you say to that?
Mhm. Well, I would just point out that it is rooted in Christian practice through the ages. Um, Desert Fathers, all the mystics, doctors of the church.
They
What's
don't
that?
even like the word mystics.
Well, but it's part of our Christian heritage. So
It
I
sure
don't,
is.
because I've had interactions with folks that have warned me about the dangers of this, right? And I find that they're genuinely concerned for my welfare. Um, but what I talk to them about is one, I go through the basics of the practice, but most of all, I say, spend some time with someone who does this for a while,
Hmm.
who's done this for a while, who has this as a practice. Notice who they are. Notice their actions. Notice how they live their lives.
Yeah.
And it's written in the Bible, judge them by their fruits, right?
Hmm.
See the fruits of who they are and who they've become as a result of this practice,
Hmm.
and how they live their lives.
Well, I think there is sort of a movement of Christians who are their mind is becoming a little more open.
Mhm.
Maybe not the evangelicals, but a lot of Catholics
Mhm.
and a lot of Baptist Christians they go and do yoga,
Sure.
or they get a meditation practice. And so it is kind of opening up a little bit, I think.
Yeah.
And the word mindfulness is
Mhm.
floating around. It's a buzzword now, right?
Sure. But I mean, for me, it's not trying to do battle with folks. It's not trying to convince folks. People will be drawn to this practice that are drawn to the practice. And
Right.
those are the folks that I really want to work with. I've seen the transformation in my own life. I've seen transformation in the lives of people that I've worked with. I'm very inspired by a younger woman that works in the nursing homes. She attended a workshop just at the end of at the beginning of COVID, after first couple months of it, and she adopted the practice, and she comes back and says, if it wasn't for me finding this practice and doing it on a daily basis, I'd never be able to survive there, because all the pressures that she's under, they're understaffed. Nursing homes are understaffed. Seeing her patients and her staff, her fellow staff members, get COVID, some pass away. So she's able to manage the difficulties of her life by having a practice like this, and then being able to be transformed, to be able to let go of these different concerns that she has, and stay alert and focused in her work, but also not be consumed by bringing it home afterwards.
Do you do a lot of work with the Bible with the students and associates as well? Go through verses and whatnot, and
it's not really Bible based. I mean, we do Lectio Divina, which is reading the Bible in or Bible passages, in a method that allows us to kind of deepen and see the inner and personal meaning of those passages to us. But that's a different practice. It's not
sort
centering
of
prayer.
The metaphysics of it, kind of, or
well, it's opening up to the inspirations of the Spirit, right? So centering prayer is often done before we do Lectio, just so that we become more centered, more grounded in our true selves, so that we can then open up and hear the meaning of these passages at a deeper level.
What's welcoming prayer?
So welcoming prayer is a companion practice to centering prayer. Centering prayer is done, maybe an hour a day, 40 minutes to an hour in a day. Welcoming prayer can be done the rest of the day, in the remaining 23 or plus hours. So welcoming prayer is just an opening up to ourselves, to the where we store different emotions in our body, where we store trauma in our body. And rather than allowing that to cause us to go into reactivity, we open up to experience that, inviting God's presence in action, in that feeling, in that body sensation, so that we can experience the sensation without having to react to it. It opens us up to a more responsive way of being in life, because a lot of our let me give you an example. So Keating, I think one of Keating's best contributions to Christian spirituality is taking a psychological view on prayer, or the underpinnings of prayer. And so Keating defines the underpinnings of the false self, the way we engage in the world normally, as our over-attachment to security, affection, or control, which comes from our childhood, right? So we have not that those are bad, we need to be secure, we need to have a certain amount of affection, and we need to have a certain amount of control over our lives. But because of events in our lives, we have set false expectations on how much security we really need, how much control we really need, how much affection we really need.
Yeah.
And our reactivity comes from the desire to meet those at an excess, right? So the billionaire needs $1 billion more dollars, because that'll make him either have more control, feel more secure, or feel better liked. That's an extreme example. But let's say you're walking down the street, or I'm walking down the street, and I see you, and you're deep in thought. and I say hi, but you're so deep in thought that you don't even recognize me, or you don't even acknowledge me. Right? You got something really stirring up in you.
Mm-hmm.
So I could walk by and I could say, that Kevin guy, he must not like me. We did that podcast, and he must not like me. He never acknowledged me. Right. So if I have an over attachment to affection, right, then I could react that way. Or if I'm overly attached to control, I could say, like Kevin, I don't care what was going on in his life. If somebody says hi to him, he should say hi back. Mm-hmm. Right. I'm attempting to control how you should behave. Or security. That Kevin guy, is he mad at me? Is he going to say something bad about me on some future podcast, or something like that? So I have an over attachment to security. Right. I don't want to be harmed by you. Right. All those are reactive. They're kind of dumb, right? All those are reactive responses that come from these places, right? My need for security, affection, control. Well, the way it works typically is those traumas, those things that caused us to have those overreactions, those over exaggerated needs for those, are stuffed in our bodies, right? They're feelings that we've repressed in our bodies because at the time we experienced those events, we didn't know how to process them, right? So they're stored in our bodies for us to be able to process at a later point. So the waterfall comes in that, well, when I see you, some feeling in my body starts to come up, like my chest tightens, or my stomach clenches, or my jaw gets tight, right?
Yeah.
If I'm able to catch that and be with that feeling, I don't have to go into that emotion, right? Feel that emotion. If I can't do that and I can still capture the emotion and be with the emotion, I don't have to go into the story, right? So it's that cascade, it's that waterfall of, if I can be with the feeling in my body, I don't have to stir up the emotion. If I could be with the emotion, I don't have to stir up the story that I continually tell about why I'm feeling this way.
You're transmuting it right there on the spot.
And then it's a prayer because you're inviting God's presence in action there. And there's lots of methods that do this, right? There's a Buddhist method. I remember reading about it in Pema Chodron's book, I think it was. And you have this warrior attitude about being with this. And it's hard to be with these. It really is. I mean, that's why we've repressed them, because they were hard to be with at the very beginning, right?
They sting on the way out.
and they're just as hard to be with, right?
Yeah.
But if you're there by yourself, right? If you have this warrior attitude, you're there still trying to face these things by yourself.
Yeah.
But if you're inviting an awareness of God's presence in action there, you're not by yourself anymore.
No.
Right. Mm-hmm. And that's the beauty of looking at this as a prayer practice, because it's hard. These things are hard. And, after practicing this stuff for years, it's hard. It's still hard, right? Yeah. But you're consciously inviting God's presence in action to be with you in that feeling. So you don't, have to experience that emotion as bad, right? You don't, and you certainly don't want to spin into those thought patterns.
Yeah, this is what I'm going through now. I talked to you on the email about it very briefly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like an emotional detox, cleanse.
And that's a great way to put it. Yeah, it's a great way to put it, because we carry this stuff with us. We've carried it all our lives.
Oh, it's coming up, man.
Yeah.
And it just came up an hour ago before this podcast. I was, doing some crying.
Yeah.
But it's at the point now where I'm trusting the process.
Yeah.
And so it's not like a thing of, why am I crying? This is weird.
Yeah.
Now it's like, oh, some more is coming up. Cool.
Yeah. I don't know if you read Richard Rohr, but he's been writing about grief and trauma the last couple weeks. And, he just reminded me, it's the gift of tears, right? allowing that emotion. It's a cleansing, right?
Yes.
Allowing that emotion to come up, right? The more we fight it, the more we repress it.
Yeah.
The more we have to deal with it because it needs to be dealt with.
It needs to be dealt with.
And just like letting go in entering prayer, we're letting go of not of the emotion. Eventually we do, right? We're letting go of our resistance to experience it and just let it come and trust that God's presence and action, and the action, if you sit with it long enough, sometimes it goes away. Sometimes it'll get worse for a while, but there comes a point where you feel the shift, where the emotion isn't the same. That feeling isn't the same. There's a shift. And that's, I believe, God's action. That's the action of grace. That's what I call grace, right? When that shift happens, when it doesn't have that charge anymore.
Yeah, it's been a wild 6 months for me. Dark night of the soul, some people call it.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of Christian mystics that made famous by
John of the Cross. Yeah.
John of the Cross. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What
was he going through when he wrote that?
Well, he had a very interesting life, right? Teresa of Avila and he were companions. He was actually a director for her, even though he was like 20 years younger than her. They were on a mission to clean house, I guess, at the Carmelite order to really kind of deepen their spirituality. And a bunch of his brother monks captured him and threw him in a closet for a year. He escaped, but basically they beat him, threw him in a closet because he was trying to reform the order.
Okay. Making change,
right? And it was in that process that he had he wrote some of his most beautiful writing, his poems, but he also had a very, very much of a deepening with God. And that was one of his dark night episodes during that time. Well, because if you think about it, right, where's God? God's abandoned me, right? If you're John of the Cross, to his brother monks, right? I mean, these people he knew, who brutalized him.
Right, his brothers attacked him.
Yeah.
So the name Dark Night of the Soul has now become synonymous with spiritual folks going through a episode.
Well, and it's an invitation. I mean, I've come to understand it as the invitation by God to deepen, right? Because in the dark night, you lose touch with God, right? Typically, right? You lose touch with the God that you know, right? Because the God that you know is never truly God, right? It's the God that you know at the time that you know, right? At the level of consciousness, right? That's really kind of another thing that Keating, that's a fruit of this path of Keating's and really all the contemplatives, is the spiritual journey is really raising of our level of consciousness, right? Level after level after level. So when we begin to shift out of what's comfortable, right, that challenges us, right? It feels like death. It feels like this powerful transition's happening, and my world falls apart, right?
Losing
and
control.
That's the time
Losing
where,
control.
and you lose control. Well, you lose security, affection, control, whatever sometimes it's all three, right? There's typically one or two that you're most attached to. But yeah, you lose all of those things that made sense of the world to you because you're invited to a deeper level with God. And that's the power of letting go, right? I mean, when you do practices like this, right, you're training yourself, right? The transformation is in the ability to let go, because then that allows for you to get through the dark nights. Because it's an invitation. Those are real invitations to let go.
Yeah, centering prayer might be a nice thing to integrate into a dark night. I'm not even talking about the episode of a dark night. I mean an actual dark night, like a sleepless night or something.
Could be. I mean, welcoming prayer, if you feel stuff coming up. In centering prayer, there's lots of thoughts that come up. The shadow, the classic shadow comes up. I'm so judgmental. I'm so, I can be cruel. Those understandings of who you really are externally, right, as a person come up. And that's called the unloading of the unconscious. It's a kind of thought, so when you're ready, that begins to happen. But again, it's for your own healing. If the instructions are just let those go as they come up, sometimes you can't, though. And if you're really feeling in a bodily way, the invitation is to then kind of transition into welcoming prayer, to be with those feelings, to be with those sensations in a bodily way. So then your focus is not so much to let go, but to be with and let go of resisting being with. So you transition out of centering prayer to welcoming prayer. Now, that's not, you don't want to do that all the time. But if you find that you can't let that go, then the most helpful thing is to just admit that and sink into it.
Yes, it always seems to come back to acceptance.
Acceptance and letting go, surrender. Yeah.
Every tradition, surrender.
Well, that's how you let go of the ego, right? Because the ego wants to be in control. Right?
This is what Jesus had to do, being marched down to that cross.
Yeah. I mean, in a lot of ways, the spiritual journey is dying. It's our ego dying, right? It's the constructs we have to keep ourselves in control. That needs to be let go of, so that we can allow God to be in control.
Yeah, so a lot of mystics would say that's the whole story of the crucifixion is Jesus, having to surrender, letting go, dying on the cross and being resurrected. And that's the ego death into an enlightened being.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's the path of, some Christian mystics were having a program on Bernadette Roberts, and she wrote about her famous writing is the no self, right? Where you go beyond the true self, right? To just being that at one with God. There is no distinction between you and God anymore.
No separation.
No separation. Right.
This is a big message in the famous book, A Course in Miracles.
I've picked it up. I've begun to read some parts of it. I mean, I think there's it's a big book, so it takes some time to digest.
And it's supposedly Jesus.
Yeah.
It's Master J.
Yeah. I mean, some of the key themes: forgiveness, love. I think that's very much in the Christian path. Right? Jesus taught forgiveness, right? Jesus was all about love. Certainly this unity consciousness is something that we strive for. We strive to realize, be transformed into. Saint Bourgeot, taught that, actually believes that Keating, before he died, got to this place of no self. So from that standpoint, there's certainly resonance there with what I understand the Course to have written. Yeah. But I'm not an expert in the Course, so that's I know there's some themes there that seem to resonate with my own understanding of Christianity and my own experience of the practice. Did
Merton reach his true self? I really appreciate his work, and he teamed up with Thich Nhat Hanh for a book, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, he didn't write a book with him. I mean, he had exchanges with him. He knew him.
Yeah.
He wrote letters back and forth, but I think that was the extent of their work together.
Yeah. Thich Nhat Hanh's still around,
Yeah,
like 80, 89, 90.
yeah.
So what is a spiritual director?
A spiritual director, a listener, a listener. It really just, as a director, you're really just listening to the person, and you're opening yourselves up to, with presence, with true presence, uh, to the inspiration of the spirit. Right? So in the conversation, you hope that the spirit shows up so that you can hear, very much like Lectio. You're hearing the inspiration of the spirit in what the other person is saying, right? So you may be speaking about an event in your life. You can be speaking about your dark night experience, and I may hear something that really resonates with me in terms of my listening to you, and my being open to what you're saying, and my being open to the inspirations of God that I can share with you. I'll repeat back to you, or I'll say, I heard this, and something is saying this to me about it. Does that make sense to you? Does that resonate with you? So it's not a director in that I'm telling you what you should do or not do. It's really, I'm listening to you and trying to hear what the spirit may be revealing in that conversation.
Have you seen a lot of Dark Knight episodes from people?
Yeah, I mean, I've gone through some dark nights, I believe, myself. I've helped some people through some dark nights. Yeah.
Yeah, and when we say dark, I always put the word episode at the end because it's not necessarily just one dark night. It's
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes on. I think there are various dark nights. Again, if you look at it as an invitation to go deeper with God, I don't think you're one and done. I think that that journey continues through your life if you're true, if you're a true seeker.
it's definitely deepened for me.
Mhm.
It's different. I mean, I spoke to a friend the other day who went through it like 3 years ago.
Mhm.
She said she had this one episode where she cried for 6 hours straight.
Mhm.
I was like, whoa. She's like, oh yeah, the pain, the throat, the shoulders, everything was sore for weeks.
Yeah, yeah,
That's a workout.
yeah. No, it's not easy. The spiritual journey is not easy.
No, and the people around you don't really understand. They think you're just depressed or
No, I mean, there could truly be some of that, but if it's depression, or if it's, if you have a desire for God, just or the desire to deepen to the divine, and you feel that absence, that's usually what characterizes that dark night.
yeah. Yeah, regular depression is you don't want to do anything, you don't care
Yeah, you
about
don't have
it.
any desire. All right, here you have a desire for God. You just feel a sense of absence.
I had that for maybe a month,
Mhm.
and then it just faded off into, motivation to get better,
Mhm.
I've always been into God, but I never put him first,
Mhm.
if that makes any sense.
Yeah, right. That's the typical. I'd say that's probably how I live a lot of my life. But that's the typical way that we do, right, in society, right? Because it's all about making a living. It's all about succeeding. It's all about, it's those energy centers, those needs for security, affection, control. Right?
Yeah. So apparently I just repressed a whole bunch of stuff over the last few decades or
Well, welcome to the human race, right?
I just turned 42.
Mhm.
So now there's the midlife thing there too on top of it, right? So let's throw that on top of it.
Sure, sure. Mhm.
and and then, it's like one thing of loss,
Mhm.
grief can
Mhm.
trigger this whole episode. It's very interesting.
Yeah. And the invitation is to let go of those things that consumed you, right, for so long.
Yeah.
And trust that there's something better, something deeper, something more meaningful beneath it all. So a lot of it, a lot of the journey too that we're talking about in general is an evolution to trust. Right? You just need to trust that there is something better. There's something more, that there is something beyond these things that you're attached to, that we're all attached to, and I've got to be careful because I'm not aiming it just at you. I'm talking, this is the human condition. This is, welcome to being human.
Yeah. Emotions, heavy stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I had this one turnaround moment back in May. And up to this point, I'm really going through it. I cried for 7 days straight, and I was freaked out because I was like, why am I crying? Right. And I'm going through all this. Now I discovered Emmett Fox. And so I was reading some of his stuff, and bringing God and the divine into your life to bring more positivity and overcome your difficulties. And so I was playing around with that. And this one day I was, I think I just got out of the shower. I'm sitting there and I just start crying. Like, why am I crying? What's going on? What's the problem here? And then sort of crossed my mind is the phrase, I am loved by God.
Yeah.
So then the tears turn to gratitude. So now it is a big crying episode, good 30 minutes, now I am loved by God. It's this big cleanse, right? I finally get done. I say, I'm going to go outside and get some air. I go out on the front porch and I look down and I notice there's this one little white flower in a whole lawn of green grass. There's just this one little flower. I never noticed it before. I sit on the porch all the time.
Sure.
I get up, I play with my, touch it with my finger. I took a picture of it. I still got it.
Yeah.
I'm like, what's this little flower? Is he hearing me?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I told my mom about it, and she looks at the flower later on. She goes, oh, that's the Star of Bethlehem.
What?
What? No, I Google it. Star of Bethlehem. It's the flower, the Star of Bethlehem. On top of that, at the time I was taking some Bach flower. You ever heard of Bach flower remedies?
No.
They're these little tinctures that help alter your mood.
Okay.
Non-medical.
Yeah.
And I have this little tincture sitting on my bureau of the Star of Bethlehem, which is supposed to be for grief.
Wow. Yeah.
I was like, this is not ironic at all.
Yeah.
And that was
synchronicity is a thing.
And from that point on, things turned around. I mean, I'm still in it, but
there's hope, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. And that comes with trust, right? I mean, trust precedes hope, I think. And when you surrender, right, to trust, then hope arises. Then this is just a visible sign of that. But what needed to happen though is that inner transformation happened first.
And here we are, almost 3 months later.
Yeah.
Just trusting my way through.
Yeah.
So Mike, where can people come find you and say hello?
Yeah. So I've got a lot of different places that they can do that. Probably on my website, I need to do a lot more work up there. invialumen.org, something that I don't spend enough time revising. So, but that's the good contact place for me.
In via lumen. Now there's a word you don't hear often.
Yeah, it's Latin. It's in the way, or on the way light. So that's kind of my inspiration, is to help people shed a little light on the way.
And that's INVIALUMEN.org.
.org, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Very cool. And you're also doing centering prayer groups.
I do a centering prayer group at Holy Family. I coordinate the Christian contemplative experience there. It's a bunch of it's a structured program for Christian contemplatives. So we do monthly Saturday meetings, and we do introductory workshops to different practices, do retreats. India Lumen also has a link to the Merton Society locally that I coordinate. And I also coordinate, I'm the coordinator for contemplative outreach in the state. So lots of different coordinating activities.
Yeah. Well, Mike, thank you very much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Inner Peace with Dr. Reese. If this episode opened your heart, feel free to share on social media and tell your loved ones. Also, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Until next time, may peace be with you.